Introducing YouTube memberships, a fun way to support the channel while getting some exclusive perks. Click the join button to become a member now and get benefits like badges next to your name on videos, behind-the-scenes photos, advantages during the live trivia game, discounts on merchandise, private one-on-one video chats, the ability to request future video topics, and exclusive 8 to 10 minute videos on the history of the NFL. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want to give you a scenario. Suppose you're playing a pickup basketball game, and there's one guy on the opposing team that is very clearly really good, as in, he's the best player on the court. The guy was a former college basketball player. He's built. He's got a nasty jump shot. He can drive to the hoop. He's tall. Basically, the man can do it all. Your team has to figure out a way to stop him and his team. Now, you've got a few options, but I think just about every single option, assuming that the other players on the other team are a similar skill level to the players on your team, involves not getting the ball in his hands. Have someone on him at all times. Heck, have two men on him. Don't give him any space, because any separation, and he's more likely than not going to hit the shot. It's a tall order, but it's your only chance of winning the game. However, I think we can all agree that the worst idea in the world, and a surefire way they are going to get killed, is to just not cover him. What if your strategy involves not covering him, and just letting him get the ball whenever he wants? I don't think I'm revealing anything shocking when I say that I think you're going to get destroyed by doing that. Well, as stupid as that strategy was, it's very similar to what the Indianapolis Colts did in a 1989 game against the Los Angeles Rams with the man that you've been watching this whole time right here, wide receiver Henry Ellard. Because during the game, the Colts had a brilliant strategy, and by brilliant, I mean absolutely stupid and moronic. What if we just don't cover Ellard? And I don't mean that they tried and they failed, because that happens. I mean that after the game, even Rams players were laughing about how dumb the Colts were, and how they couldn't believe the stupidity of the strategy. And it wasn't for one play, it was for the entire game. The strategy was so bad that players on the opposition were flat out laughing at you and were absolutely confused as to how this even happened or how anyone thought this was a good idea. If there was ever dumb decisions for an entire game, this would qualify, because we need to take a deep dive into just how stupid the Colts were throughout this contest. Because this is the story behind what has to be, in the history of the Colts franchise, the dumbest defense in franchise history. Before I talk about the actual strategy in question, we need some context to understand the importance of this scheme, as well as how good the receiver in question was, because it's not like this guy came out of nowhere. It's September 17th, 1989. It's week 2 of the NFL season, and we've got an interconference battle on our hands over at Allegiant Stadium between the Indianapolis Colts and the Los Angeles Rams. For the purposes of our story, the team we're focused on is the Colts, because this is a big game for them. Number one, this is the national game of the week for NBC, with Dick Enberg and Bill Walsh on the call. Number two, it's the long-awaited return of running back Eric Dickerson to Los Angeles after that highly publicized trade during the 1987 season. People wanted to see how arguably the best running back in football would do in his first game against his former team. But outside of those reasons, in terms of the standings, this was a big one for Indy, as they lost their first game of the season in Week 1 to the San Francisco 49ers. Granted, I don't think anyone thought that they would beat San Francisco, seeing as they were the defending champion, so that was kind of a given. But this game against the Rams feels like a must-win, or else you fall to 0-2. In 1988, there were 7 teams that started the season 0-2, including the Indianapolis Colts. None of them made the playoffs. 1987 was screwy because of the strike and replacement players playing 20% of the year. But the last full year in 1986, there were 8 teams, including the Indianapolis Colts, to start 0-2. none of them made the playoffs. And in 1985, there were 7 teams to start 0-2, including, you guessed it, the Indianapolis Colts. None of them made the playoffs. So in the last 3 full seasons, not a single 0-2 team made the playoffs. Getting off to a good start to the season is so important, and it's why this game was a must-win of sorts for Indy. And if they were going to win this game, more than anything else, they had to find a way to stop this man right here, wide receiver Henry Ellard. The best receiver in football at the time was San Francisco 49ers wideout Jerry Rice, and no one's denying that. But I think most people would agree at this point in history that the number 2 receiver in the league was Ellard. He was coming off of an incredible 1988 campaign, where he helped guide the Rams to the playoffs by finishing the year with 86 receptions, which was second in the league behind New York Jets wideout Al Toon, 10 receiving touchdowns, which was third in the league behind Miami wideout Mark Clayton and Washington wideout Ricky Sanders, and 1,414 receiving yards, which led the entire league. You had a guy who, in the 3 big categories, finished inside the top 3 in all of them. And in the opening game of the 1989 season, he was showing no signs of slowing down, as in the team's 31-21 win over the Falcons, he had 5 catches for 99 yards and a touchdown. Over his last 5 regular season games dating back to 1988, the numbers were straight out of a video game, with 34 catches for 564 yards and 6 touchdowns, including a touchdown in every single game. A huge part in the success of the Rams offense during this time was because Henry Ellard was that good. So it was obvious that the Colts had to find some way to stop him and slow him down. You do that, you've got a shot. But as so many teams knew throughout the weeks and the years, if you don't do that, you're completely screwed. However, the Colts had a bit of a problem entering this game. Their secondary play was kind of poor. Some teams have the players to stop Ellard, and on paper, the Colts definitely did not have them, as they had not invested good draft capital into the position and hadn't made the moves necessary to compete there. I mean, out of 28 teams in 1988, they had one of the worst pass defenses in football for a reason, as they ranked 25th in yards allowed and allowed Vinny Testaverde of all people, as in the Buccaneers version of Vinny Testaverde, to throw for 469 yards in a game. To give you an idea of how poor their secondary was, entering the season, the starting cornerback was supposed to be Chucky Miller, the team's 8th round pick from the 1987 NFL Draft. He was the team's starter for the first preseason game of the year. Miller didn't even make it to the regular season, and got cut by the team before week 1. So the next man up was John Baylor, the team's 5th round pick from the 1988 NFL Draft, who did not play in any games as a rookie. He started the first game against the 49ers, and was so bad that he got benched. Unsurprisingly, Jerry Rice had his way that game, having 163 yards and a touchdown. And now, the next man up with Miller getting cut and Baylor getting benched was Chris Good, the team's 10th round pick in 1987. This was a secondary in shambles that had to find some way to defend the man that you've been watching this whole time, Henry Ellard. So what are some ways you could do it? You could play zone. You could double cover him at all times. You can probably think of a bunch of other things that you can do. But the Colts decided to do none of them, because the Colts' strategy was rather brilliant and revolutionary. And to be honest, I can't believe that no one had ever tried it before. What if we just don't cover him? What if we just play man-to-man on him the entire game, putting our 3rd string quarterback on an island the entire game with no linebacker help, no safety help, and no additional cornerback help against the 2nd best wide receiver in football? It's like saying, what if you put me one-on-one in a basketball game against LeBron James? So this was the strategy the Colts were going to ride with. Their 3rd string quarterback, purely because the first one was so bad that he got cut, and the second one was so bad that he got benched, going up against an elite wide receiver with no help whatsoever.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
And what's crazy is that as dumb as this defense seemed, with a third-string cornerback one-on-one on Henry Ellard the entire game, it actually worked. Bill Muir was the team's defensive coordinator, and this was his first season ever coaching a defense. Prior to this, he was an offensive line coach, so he had never coached anywhere on a defense before. But credit to him, this strategy worked. Henry Ellard was completely shut down. Ellard couldn't do anything. He was blanketed all day because he had no idea how to beat this man-to-man coverage. And I'm just kidding, this was a freaking disaster. Come on, what did you expect? Honestly, what the heck did you expect? Turns out, playing one-on-one for the entire game against Henry freaking Ellard is not a good idea. In the first half, Ellard had 5 catches for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns, catching a 29-yard pass in the first quarter and a 17-yard pass in the second quarter. A slash line of 5-1-12-2 for an entire game is incredible, but for one half of football, that is a dominant performance, and that's even dominant by his incredibly high standards. But at the halftime break, you would think that Muir and the Colts defense would make an adjustment, especially with the game tied at 17. Clearly, this man-to-man nonsense is not working, has not worked for the entire game, and likely will never work, seeing as Ellard caught just about every pass thrown his way. You would think that the Colts would switch it up and try something different for the second half. But amazingly enough, and I have no idea why, they didn't. They switched to absolutely nothing. They kept playing man-to-man on Ellard in the second half, and were either too stupid to make a change, or were too stubborn and said, well, this has to work eventually, so screw it. Let's keep trying it. Spoiler alert, it did not work. Because with the Colts in the same defensive coverage on Ellard for the second half, with no help and no adjustments whatsoever, Ellard caught another 7 passes for 118 yards and a touchdown, with this one being the go-ahead 6-yard touchdown in the third quarter to give the Rams a 24-17 lead, as they'd eventually win it by a final score of 31-17. When the game ended, the numbers were historically good, as Henry Ellard, playing against a third-string cornerback for the entire contest in man-to-man coverage, posted 12 catches for 230 yards and 3 touchdowns. Again, this was a man averaging 7 catches, 112 yards, and more than a touchdown per game over his last 5 games, and was an AP first-team All-Pro. And yet, despite all of that, and despite the Colts clearly knowing how good he was, seeing as they tried to trade for him a few years before, the Colts played like this. The 12 catches was a career high, unsurprisingly. The 230 yards was a career high, unsurprisingly. And the 3 touchdowns was also, you guessed it, a career high. Henry Ellard ended his illustrious NFL career as a should-be Hall of Famer, as he absolutely should be in there, and ended it with 814 catches for 13,777 yards and 65 touchdowns in 228 games played. And yet, his career high at each of the big 3 categories came in this one game against the Colts because the Colts just decided to be stupid. How stupid were the Colts? Even the Rams were laughing at them afterwards and were completely befuddled as to why Indianapolis thought this was a good idea. It's like when you launch fireworks in your own house and then your house burns down. Like, what did you think was going to happen? And the same applies here. Said quarterback Jim Everett, a lot of other teams have doubled Henry. The Colts didn't even attempt it. We thought the Colts would come out with some sort of double coverage on Henry and make us throw elsewhere. But they kept with their defense, which we ended up taking advantage of. I just couldn't believe all the times he was open. And Ellard felt the same way, saying, I felt like a kid in a candy store with a choice of any candy I wanted. It's like when you walk in and nobody's stopping you. The Colts didn't really use any kind of coverage to take away what we were doing. It was just a matter of me and Jim playing catch. When things are going like they did in the first half, You would think a defensive adjustment or something would happen. You hope it doesn't, and that's the way it turned out. So I'm just kind of surprised and happy at the same time. This is absolutely embarrassing. The wide receiver is saying how easy it was because the Colts did nothing and made no adjustments, and how stunned he was at how stupid the Colts were being. And the cornerback is saying that he was in disbelief at how stupid the Colts were lining up out there, and how they didn't even try making life tough for Ellard. Instead, Jim Everett and Henry Ellard were like the Commodores, because it was easy like Sunday morning. Henry Ellard had another great season in 1989, leading the league in receiving yards per game and making it to the Pro Bowl yet again, the third one of his career. As for the Colts, they finished the season 8-8, missing the playoffs by 1 game. Although their pass defense did improve as the year went on, so that's something at least. But still, the fact that the Colts missed the playoffs by just 1 game, well, this game against the team behind me right here, the Rams, was maybe the one that got away, and one that they could have won if they did literally anything else besides what they wound up doing. What's the definition of insanity again? So I'm just going to throw some pointers out there for any defensive coordinators or coaches watching this video. If you're playing the Vikings, don't put your third-string cornerback in man-to-man for the entire game on Justin Jefferson. If you're playing the Bengals, don't put your third-string cornerback in man-to-man for the entire game on Jamar Chase. It's not a good idea on paper, and it definitely will not translate on the field. And the Colts found this out the hard way, with a defensive game plan and strategy so bad that even the other team was mystified and was laughing at them. Because when the Rams realized that the Colts were just going to do this for the entire game, in all the best ways, it left Henry Ellard saying, "What the L?" Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.